Okay, moving on to the theme 3, human environment interaction. A lot of this we'll talk about in class with the issues of land use conflict and deforestation. But we're going to move on to some other things here. Again, we talk about how people use natural resources. One of the valuable natural resources in the region is oil, especially off the coast of Venezuela and Mexico. Most of that is found from rigs, oil rigs, as you see here depicted. So when you look over this graph, you see top 5 sources of U.S. petroleum, and you see that Venezuela and Mexico are actually number 2 and number 3 in where we get our oil. Another source of fuel, as people start looking for alternatives to fossil fuel-based gasolines, is something called gasohol. Gasohol is gasoline mixed with an alcohol, which is made from refined sugarcane. Sugarcane grows widely in the tropical regions, and one of the biggest producers of sugarcane in the region is Brazil. It's been called the most successful alternative fuel to date. Brazil is the world's second largest producer of ethanol fuel, and it's the world's largest exporter. The United States, we're the number 1, but it's you'll see Brazil is closely catching up. Brazil makes its ethanol from sugarcane, which is 7 times more efficient than corn, which is what the United States uses. And you can see why sugarcane is considered better than corn, but we can't grow sugarcane in our climate. Brazil's program of ethanol is 40 years old, so they have more of a head start. It's estimated that gasohol could potentially reduce greenhouse gas emissions by as much as 61%. And you can see some of the comparisons versus the United States and Brazil as far as why they're considered the leaders in ethanol or gasohol production. Back in 2010, Brazil produced 6.92 billion gallons of ethanol, and overall Brazil is considered the world's biofuel industry leader. And again, we talk about biofuel as energy which can be made from living matter, like plant refuse. This is, we look at a picture here, and you see dark smoke, but that's really nothing compared to the pollutants caused by burning fossil fuels for vehicles. When you run a car on ethanol, what comes out of the tailpipe, instead of being carbon dioxide or some other poisonous gas, it's just water vapor, so completely non-pollutive. Again, gasohol is really only something that probably would work in Brazil and maybe some other tropical countries. This is due to the fact that Brazil has advanced agricultural technology, as long as a vast amount of arable land. We really can't catch up with Brazil because their climate is much more suitable to growing these things. And this is a big future industry. The last way we'll talk about how people interact with their environment in this slideshow is with tourism. Tourism is a major part of the economy, and it's an example of people use in Latin America, use their climate and use the terrain to attract people to either beautiful beaches or to historical sites. Moving on to movement. Again, we'll talk about how this region's been affected by movement of people, goods, and ideas. In the late 1400s, specifically 1492, Christopher Columbus lands in the Americas. He was one of the first, followed quickly by many others and other Europeans, and their goal in Latin America was to make money off of trade, to establish colonies for people in their mother countries to live in, and to convert the native people to Christianity. The Columbian Exchange is one of those immensely important events in world history, and you can see that depicted up here. In the Columbian Exchange, African slaves would go to the New World. Sorry, back that up. To people who lived here. The map at the bottom shows, it's hard to see, I know it's blurry, but these are numbers. This is primarily where African slaves were taken from, and these arrows show you where they went. And as you see, the vast amount of African slaves taken from West Africa end up in the Caribbean and in South America. We move forward now to more modern migration and movement. We see people from poor Latin American countries moving to wealthier Latin American countries or to the United States. This is caused by various economic, social, or security problems. And they come to the Latin America or to wealthy Latin American countries or to the United States to work as cheap labor. Back in 2002, it was believed that 16% of immigrants in the United States were from Mexico. By 2010, that number had jumped up to 24% of immigrants to the U.S. from Mexico. So we're seeing an increase in the migration of people from Latin America to the United States. The term remittance refers to money sent by migrants back to their families. So they come to a country like the United States, they earn money here, and instead of spending it here, they send that back. Remittance will help pay for health care, schooling, and other community improvements back home. So it becomes a very important part of the economy back in the countries where these people come from. Again, we're talking about movement. By the late 1800s, early 1900s, we begin to see the movement of the United States as a military power into Latin America, where we felt as a country that we needed to get involved in the politics of Latin American countries in order to safeguard our best interests. In 1903, for example, the country of Colombia opposed U.S. efforts to build a canal through Panama. At that time, Panama was a Colombian territory. So the United States, we supported Panama's Declaration of Independence from Colombia. We basically told the Panamanians, if you guys want to be independent, we just might help you out. So we essentially started a civil war in Panama so they could declare independence. We show up as they declare independence and beat back the Colombians. In exchange, Panama allowed the United States to build a canal through their country, connecting the Gulf of Mexico with the Pacific Ocean. And we took ownership of that. And we owned it for almost 100 years. It's important to remember the Panama Canal. It allowed the United States to shorten travel time between the Atlantic and Pacific Oceans. Here's a modern picture of the Panama Canal. Today, the Panama Canal is controlled again by Panama. This was a very important piece of construction because it allowed us to get naval ships from the Atlantic to the Pacific quickly and allowed us to be a major power in the early 1900s. During the Cold War, if you remember, the Cold War is that period in history between World War II and the 1990s when our biggest concern was the spread of communism and the spread of the influence of the Soviet Union. So the expansion of communism was America's #1 political issue. That's very important to understand. The governments of Latin America, those that appeared to be under the influence of communism, that was not something we could allow to happen. In fact, we'd rather allow brutal right-wing military dictatorships who seized power away from elected governments. We prefer those to popular communist governments in our backyard. We couldn't allow that to happen. A couple of figures here that you can see here is this guy here in the white. This is Augusto Pinochet. He was a dictator from Chile that we helped put into power and keep in power, while at the same time he brutally oppressed his people, had mass secret arrests, people disappeared, his political enemies. On the other side, we have another figure, Che Guevara. Che Guevara was a important sort of freedom fighter, rebel from Argentina, and who fought in Cuba as well. he was a very popular guy to his people because he wanted to overthrow governments that were brutal, supported by the United States, and in exchange help the poor classes. The CIA helped get him killed. So, again, number one issue at that time was, just like today, a big issue is we're afraid of the spread of radical Islam, we're afraid of terrorists like Al Qaeda and Taliban. Back at this point, we were so concerned about the movement of communism through the region that we made friends with some pretty brutal people. That's a lesson it's important to remember. And our last one is region. So we talk about what do the people in these countries have in common? Why do we group all these countries together in something we call Latin America? And that's what you have here. We have languages that reflect the colonial past, meaning, where the Spanish used to own, people speak Spanish. Where the Portuguese used to own, people speak Portuguese. Where the French, and so on and so on and so on. Often the modern cultures today, we find these regions are actually a blend of the European culture that conquered it, but also the Native American culture that was there before, and a lot of influences from West African cultures brought over by slaves. Family and religion is important pretty much throughout the region. It's mostly Roman Catholic. The entire region is located in the Western Hemisphere and is located mostly in the tropics, and that has an impact on daily life, of course. Although there is a diversity of climates based on elevations, and it is a region throughout up north to south into the islands which is rich in many natural resources. And that brings us to the end of our 5 teams class notes. Hopefully you got that up. If you didn't, of course, you can always rewind this, play it again, and that should do it. Have a good one.